Well, I think that no Q&A session in Singapore starts better than with a question by Tommy Koh. So Ambassador Koh, please.
Thank you very much, Dominic. I would like to join everybody in welcoming Mr. Attali to Singapore. And as I would like to see you more often here, may I begin by making a plea with you. One of the many institutions you have founded is Planet Finance, a non-profit organization which helps microfinance institutions around the world. It would be wonderful if you could consider locating your regional headquarters in Singapore. And my question has to be relevant to your topic. So let me begin by expressing a puzzlement about a comment you made right at the beginning of your lecture. You said a fundamental cause of the crisis is a contradiction between, on the one hand, a global market, and on the other hand, the absence of a global rule of law. I'm puzzled by this diagnosis because this recent crisis began in the United States and in Europe, a country and a region which have both markets and the rule of law. So the causes must be something else. My question is this. Although we live in one interconnected global economy, it would be useful for us to disaggregate the world into its large regional economies. If I'm not wrong, Asia has staged a surprisingly quick rebound from the crisis. Countries in Latin America which are resource-rich, like Brazil, have also recovered very rapidly. The United States, as you correctly diagnosed, is beset with many problems. But many of us in Asia are optimistic about the United States because the United States has a historical record of being able to bounce back from its adversities. This then brings me to Europe. And my twin questions to you are, will the euro survive the current crisis? Is Portugal the last challenge for the Eurozone, or are we likely to see more challenges for the Eurozone in the months to come?
Thank you for this group of 25 questions. And I will try to answer to them in 2 minutes as a whole. First, as far as Planet Finance is concerned, thank you very much. As George said, I don't like to be only a thinker, I like to act. And as I do believe that the most important problem in the world today is poverty. I think that the most important way of solution for poverty is microfinance, and therefore I founded 12 years ago Planet Finance, which is now the largest microfinance platform in the world. We work in 80 countries, and we work in China, India, etc. And I would be happy to consider to open an office here with quite a pleasure. It's a proper location for us. Actually, microfinance is quite linked to the crisis because, as I said, one of the most important reasons of the crisis is the lack of a real demand. And if people, 3 billion people living below or around poverty line were having a real income increase, therefore we'll have no reason to have debt to create an artificial demand. Microfinance is real microfinance, I mean serious microfinance, is one of the elements of a solution of a crisis. I would say also that if the banking sector implements the ethics of real microfinance, which means keep the books, keep the loans in your books, advise the borrower, and do not lend to someone that cannot pay back, the financial crisis may have been less severe than it is. You mentioned that there may be a contradiction between the fact that I mentioned the lack of rule of law as causes of a crisis, while the crisis began in the US and Europe, where there is rule of law. No, there is no rule of law. There is no rule of law in a world where you have the possibility of transferring the debts by securitization into hedge funds, which are in, or funds of any kind, which are in tax havens. And look at facts. The global American and Western economy have transferred their debt into structures that are in tax havens. And tax havens are not only Liechtenstein or Switzerland or whatever. The most important tax haven and fiscal paradise in the Western world is the city of London, where tax is almost zero, and in terms of and regime for financial instruments is quite open. No rule of law, no real rule of law. That means that you have a capacity of transferring the risk you take to a dark instruments. Actually, we see the development of what is called the dark banking today as a consequence of that. Rule of law is missing, and actually the fight today between the Wall Street and London against the American governments and the European government trying to implement rule of law in terms of monitoring, controlling is exactly that. They don't want rule of law in order to save the system, and actually they explain, which is far from being wrong, that a collapse of the banking sector will be a catastrophe for the world economy. And they use that argument in order to avoid to have a rule of law for the American or the world financial sector. I do not disagree on the fact that the Americans may get out of that. How? Will it be through innovation? Why not? I will always remember people saying that Japan was #1 at the beginning of the 80s, and it never happened. Therefore, it's quite possible. The Americans are still the #1 army of the world. They are still the leading currency of the world. They can afford to do what is forbidden to others because of that status of first army, first currency. That can last 20, 50 years, we don't know. But it's lasting with a growing balloon of catastrophe going ahead. And as long as we wait, the worst will be the catastrophe. Because the amount of dollars which is out of the US is growing. And therefore, the avalanche will be heavier. As far as Europe is concerned, I think I tried to answer to your question. I see real problems with the euro. But as I was one of the drafters of the Maastricht Treaty, we did our best to draft it in a way that is impossible to get out. Even to get out from a low point of view or from a so-called high point of view, which is so-called the German point of view. Impossible. Of course, nothing is really impossible. We have seen the collapse of the ruble or the dinar in Yugoslavia and Soviet Union in the last 15 years, but it's very difficult. And therefore, my bet, maybe I hope we will meet in the years to come, maybe I will be wrong, but my bet is that the Germans will change their mind. The French agree with the Germans today. They say we don't need a federal system. But they say that, and I understand that, only to avoid to have the Germans isolated in Europe. And they prefer to be wrong with the Germans than to let the Germans be wrong alone. It's an understandable strategy. But I think on the long run, they will join the common sense of a federal jump in the European system. It's not easy to do, but it will be done. And I don't see, and I think that the euro will become one of the, will stay as it is today, one of the most influential international currencies.